She walked into that courtroom every single day for 30 years, and she never once lost. She silenced millionaires. She exposed fraudsters on live television. She made grown men lower their eyes with nothing more than a glance over the top of her glasses. Judge Judy Shandlin was the kind of woman who didn't just command a room, she owned it. But on one quiet afternoon, no cameras, no audience, no applause, this woman who had an answer for absolutely everything sat in complete silence. She was looking at her husband of over 40 years. The man who had held her hand backstage before every single taping. The man who had stood in the shadows while the whole world watched her rise. And in that moment, she was letting him go. No courtroom speech, no sharp one-liners, just silence. And here's the part that nobody ever talks about. This wasn't the first time she had walked away from him. Judy Shandlin left Jerry Shandlin not once, but twice. And what drove her to that point, both times, reveals something so deeply personal about this woman that even her most loyal fans never saw it coming. She is 83 years old now. And for the first time in her life, she is telling the whole truth. What she admitted changes everything you thought you knew about her. Judith Susan Blum was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1942. She came into this world loud, sharp, and completely unafraid. From the very beginning, she was not the kind of woman who waited for permission. The world had a plan for her: become a housewife. Raise children, stay quiet. That was what women did in her era. Judy had a completely different plan. She fought her way into New York Law School at a time when women in law were almost invisible. She graduated, she got married, she had children, and then she walked into a New York City family courtroom and never looked back. She became a prosecutor, then a family court judge. And she was relentless. She didn't comfort anyone, she didn't play games. She could see through a lie before the person even finished telling it. People in her courtroom either respected her deeply or feared her completely, usually both. In 1996, CBS handed her a television show. They thought it might find a modest audience. What happened instead stunned the entire industry. Judge Judy became the highest-rated court show in American television history. At its peak, more people watched her every single day than watched the evening news. She was earning $47 million a year. She became the highest-paid woman in the history of American television. To everyone watching at home, she was untouchable, fearless, always in control. And right beside her through all of it was Jerry Shandlin, a judge himself. Calm, charming, steady, the man behind the most powerful woman on television. From the outside, they looked like the perfect power couple. But behind that image, something had been quietly cracking for a very long time. Here is what most people never knew. Judy and Jerry's love story was never simple, not from the very beginning. They first married in 1977, two ambitious legal minds building careers in New York City. From the outside, perfectly matched. Both fighters, both driven, both used to winning. But that was also the problem. Two people who never backed down from anything, living under the same roof, created a pressure that had nowhere to go. It didn't explode all at once. It built slowly, quietly, like a fault line deepening beneath the surface. And then in 1990, after 13 years of marriage, Judy filed for divorce. The split happened quietly, no public scandal, no headlines. The world barely noticed because at that point, Judy was still just a respected family court judge, not yet the icon she would become. And then something happened that nobody expected. Just 1 year later, they got back together. In 1991, Judy and Jerry stood before their family and friends and made the same vows all over again. It looked from the outside like a love story that had found its way home. But what nobody asked and what nobody answered for decades was the question that actually mattered. What broke them the first time? What was so painful that a woman who never surrendered to anything chose to walk away? Judy gave small hints over the years, carefully chosen words. She talked about stubbornness. She talked about two people who were simply too much alike. She talked about needing space. But the real answer was buried much deeper than that. And it had everything to do with who Judy Shandlin was becoming, and whether anyone, even the man who loved her most, could truly keep up. When Judge Judy exploded onto television screens in 1996, the world Judy and Jerry had built together shifted overnight. She went from respected judge to national icon in a single season. Her face was on billboards, magazine covers, late-night shows. Millions of Americans planned their afternoons around watching her. And Jerry was still a judge, a respected one, a good one. But suddenly at every dinner, every event, every function they attended together, he was being introduced as Judge Judy's husband. That dynamic, as Judy herself would eventually admit, was complicated. She was flying to Los Angeles for tapings. She was recognized everywhere she went. She was being paid sums of money that most people couldn't imagine, and the gap between her world and Jerry's world grew wider and wider and wider. People close to the couple described a marriage quietly being redefined by imbalance, one partner soaring to a place neither of them had ever imagined. The other watching from a distance that kept growing. But here is the part that genuinely surprised people when the truth finally came out. It wasn't Jerry who struggled with the distance. It was Judy. In a deeply rare moment of honesty, Judy admitted publicly that fame had changed her in ways she hadn't expected. It made her harder, more demanding, less patient. She brought the courtroom home with her every single night. She didn't know how to turn it off. She didn't know how to stop being Judge Judy, even behind closed doors. And that is when things took a turn that nobody saw coming, because the whispers that started circulating behind the scenes weren't about an affair. They weren't about money. They were about something far more quietly devastating, two people who genuinely loved each other, who simply could not find peace in the same room anymore. The pressure kept building. And Judy, being exactly who she was about to make a decision that would stun even the people who knew her best. Then came the interview that changed everything. At 83 years old, Judge Judy sat down in front of a camera, no gavel, no black robe, no courtroom behind her, and said things she had never said publicly in her entire life. She talked about the first divorce. She talked about remarrying Jerry, and then she said something that stopped the interviewer completely mid-sentence. She said the marriage had never been difficult because of anything dramatic. No betrayal, no crisis, no single breaking point. It had been difficult because she had spent decades being the loudest voice in every room, and that came with costs. Real ones, personal ones, costs that the television cameras never captured. And then she said it. She admitted that she had not always been easy to live with. That one sentence from Judge Judy of all people hit the internet like a shockwave. This was the woman who had publicly dismantled people for making excuses. The woman who once looked a defendant dead in the eyes and said, "Don't tell me about your problems. Everyone has problems." The woman who had built an entire empire on never showing weakness, never admitting fault, never backing down. And here she was on camera telling the world she was the difficult one. But what came after that was even more unexpected. She spoke about Jerry with a softness that was almost unrecognizable. She talked about his patience, his steadiness, the way he balanced everything she wasn't. And then she said something quietly devastating, that after all these decades together, she still wasn't entirely sure they had ever truly figured each other out. The room went silent. Because in that one admission, the armor finally came off. And underneath all of it was just a woman, complicated, brilliant, fierce, and achingly human. After the interview, people went back and looked at everything differently. Old footage, old photographs, clips of Jerry appearing on her show as a guest that had always seemed charming at the time. Now those same clips looked different, the careful distance between them, the practiced smiles. The way they moved around each other like two people who had learned to coexist rather than truly connect. It all started to make sense. Judy had spent 30 years on television demanding honesty from everyone who stood before her. Stop performing, say what you mean, own your truth. And now, at 83, she was finally turning that same standard on herself. The first divorce had been about freedom. About a woman becoming something larger than her own marriage and not knowing how to hold both things at once. The remarriage had been about love. Because through every crack, through every silence, through every moment of distance, the love had never actually left. And the truth she was sharing now, all these years later, wasn't about regret. It was about understanding. Finally, fully, she understood now that the greatest challenge of her marriage had never been Jerry Shandlin. It had been Judith Shandlin, not the judge, not the icon. Just a woman, brilliant and stubborn and fiercely alive, learning what it actually costs to love someone without losing yourself completely in the process. Today, Judy and Jerry are still married. After 2 divorces, 5 children, decades of fame, and a career that rewrote the rules of American television, they are still in each other's lives, still together. Judy launched Judy Justice on Amazon Freevee, proving at 83 that she has absolutely no interest in slowing down. The sharpness is still there. The fire is still there. But the woman who sat for that interview felt different, lighter, like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally quietly set it down. She didn't have all the answers, and for the first time in her life, she seemed genuinely at peace with that. The courtroom taught her how to judge other people. Life and love taught her how to judge herself, and maybe that is the most honest verdict she has ever delivered. So what do you think? Did this side of Judge Judy surprise you? Is her story about fame, marriage, and finally facing yourself something you connect with, or did you expect something far more dramatic hiding behind the scenes? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and if stories like this, raw, real, and nothing like the headlines, are what you're here for, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because this is exactly what we do here every time. We'll see you in the next one.